Don't let a DUI charge ruin your life. Get a professional and confidential evaluation from our experienced team at True Heights Treatment. Our evaluations are accepted by the majority of courts in the state of Illinois and provide a comprehensive assessment of your substance use patterns and potential treatment needs. Get the help you need today and start your path to a brighter future. Contact us now to schedule your evaluation at 708-248-7039 or at thtdui.com.
The George Brassey podcast is made possible with funding provided from Brassey Global Strategies, LLC, a leading political consulting, public policy, government affairs, and research firm. Are you interested in running for elected office? Need advice? Call or email George 708-769-5015. Brassey Global Strategies 1 at gmail.com.
Hey everyone, it's George. I'm so glad to welcome our next guest to the program. Gary Moore is an author and poet. Gary, thanks for coming on.
Certainly. I'm so glad to be here.
Gary, can you tell the listeners a little bit about who you are?
My name is, as you said, Gary Moore. I am a native of Illinois. I grew up primarily in central Illinois. My family has lived here in Chicago Heights and the surrounding area since they've been in this area, established in this area since longer than I've been alive. And, I think I'm verging on old. So my roots to this area go back to, plenty of happy memories growing up. I considered Chicago Heights my homes, as far back as I can remember. So beyond that, I like to advertise myself simply as a poet and author and a dad.
What part of central Illinois do you grow up in, Gary?
Well, I was born in Springfield, though I really don't have any memories of living there. And I grew up primarily in Decatur, which is almost centrally located between Springfield and Champaign, if you're not familiar where that is.
What's it like to grow up part of your life there and then have relatives in Chicago Heights at the time?
Well, and it was different because it was certainly different as far as I don't want to say Decatur it's a small town. Well, it's not so much of a small town as you would measure it, but certainly not as big of an urban area as Chicago Heights and the surrounding areas up here. So I grew up in with a really close neighborhood feeling, and I remember coming up here, and my family lived, or they still do actually, some of them, on Beacon Hill, in the Beacon Hill area. And I came up here and I experienced that same sense of community, that same, growing up. So for me, it wasn't that much of a difference, because in both areas, it was just all about family and community. And so that's something that I've always taken with me, about my home where I grew up and here. I grew up in this area too. So family and community is something that I learned in both places.
How does the community eventually see you as an author, as a poet, growing
Well,
up?
that is interesting. As I said, Decatur isn't so small, and in fact, Decatur deals with a lot of the same issues that we experience up here. In particular with the social issues, with the violence in the community. And so growing up, I grew up during a particularly violent time, in the 90s. Excuse me. And there was, for me, it was just like a crossroad of events as I was coming to my high school years, with my parents' divorce, with me going through puberty, and like I said, there's just so much violence and just insanity going on in the community at large. And I got caught up in a lot of the anger, as a kid. So the people who know me, that I'm a poet, and they wouldn't be so surprised or shocked. But for those who were just kind of like ancillary on the outside, those who were just viewing me and just saw me as this crazy, violent kid, they would be really surprised at it. I'm certain. I've even experienced it, and so I know that it was me here, this thoughtful poet guy, completely unexpected to a lot of the people who knew me as a kid.
What changed in you?
Uh, well, that was never where I was going. That was never the direction that I was heading anyway. Um, as I said, there was just like a confluence of events that sent me spiraling off course there. So I spent a lot of my adolescent years feeling that anger, and I will say that as I got closer to graduation, uh, I was touched by a teacher who reached out to me, who reached past all that, who saw through that, and actually recognized my talent as a writer, and encouraged me in a way that really changed my mind about uh, what it was that I was doing, why, and it gave me some insight on what I could be, what I was capable of. So I give a lot of credit to her, Miss Lauderdale, Miss Lauderdale. I remember her. Um, she's a wonderful woman. Um, at the time, she made me feel seen. It was during a time of my life that I felt unimportant. I felt invisible, and she was there for me, and she encouraged me as a writer. And it was the first time that I felt that I could call myself a writer, and that's something that stuck with me since then.
What type of writing do you prefer to do?
I You see, I do a little bit of everything, but first and foremost, I consider myself a poet. This is how I view the world. I view the world through poetry. Um, you know, when I write something, when I go to write, I always go back and look at it. Um, I write, I write poetry. Everything that I do. Uh, it, it, so first and foremost, I consider myself a poet. That's what I'm most prolific at. Um, Beyond that, everything else, it takes, my hats off to everyone who can like dedicate themselves to long form fiction, man, because it's a chore. Yeah, but a lot of my short stories, in fact, they for me, they read as short stories for others, but for me, they're just really long poems. I consider myself a poet first and foremost.
Gary, can you talk a little bit about some of the long form fiction that you've written?
Certainly, certainly. what I just recently here within in the last couple of months, and I just went through this really long process of um, securing the rights, taking back the rights to a collection of short stories that I've written. Um, my publisher was sitting on this for a year or so, and there's a confluence, there's a chain of events that occurred toward the end of spring that led me to seek out. I got the rights back to my short story collection, and I did the editing all by myself, and I went through all this, and I finally just I released it, and am I still on here? Really long process with my publisher, um, resecuring the rights to my book. It was a collection of short stories. They've been sitting on it for a year or so, and there's just a confluence, a chain of events that happened that occurred over at the end of the spring, beginning of summer that just led me to get it because I wanted to see it in print. It was important to me, and so I dove into it. I did all the editing myself, and I finally released it. And so what it is it's completely different from my poetry. To be clear, my poetry is autobiographical. It tends to be rooted in real world serious topics. But my fiction, my short stories and the novel I wrote, they are fantastic. They're fantastical. They're just science fiction. You know, I dive deep into these fantastical elements, these comic book tropes. But I like to think that I deconstruct these ideas because I don't tend to on those fantastic elements. Those tend to play out in the background of most everything that I write, and I look into that. I want to focus on the human element of it. So that's what we have. We have these really familiar characters and people, and I throw them into these really fantastic situations and have them deal with these you know really wonderful just far out just ideologies and so that's what it is. In particular, it's the influence of it. Oh, just from my comic book past. I grew up reading comic books, so that's where I'm at with Wayward Homes. That was a mess.
Gary, can you talk a little bit about the role of the hero in your books?
Certainly. First and foremost, I the hero in my I I use them as a vehicle for almost I want to say like a moral, the moral of my stories. They tend to play out in that way. I when I say you know in a lot of the the movies and the TV shows, we're being inundated, being flooded with superhero movies, with the Marvel movies, and just the Amazon stuff, and they're really idea of deconstructing the superhero, but I I don't really see that. When you the cape, that's when the hero for me becomes interesting. So, I like to look my heroes when I present them. I like to present them as just regular people. You could peek behind like the glam and the superpowers and the public image, and you can just see them as people. And I believe that at that point they become a vehicle for the lesson, maybe, that is kind of interwoven into most of my stories.
Gary, would you mind sharing a poem or two with the listener?
I would love to. I would love to. Um, um, First of all, my children's book, What Daddy Do, is based on a poem that was published in my debut book of collection of poetry. It's called Songs for the Cleveland Avenue Warriors, and the poem itself is carries the same title, What Daddy Do, and just like the book, it was inspired by my son, sparked like so many of my poems, by a question that he asked me when he was about 4 years old. So this is what Daddy Do, and like I said, this is the influence where the children's book, What Daddy Do, this is where it was born. So I just did the dishes, got dishpan hands, but I did the dishes like a man. I did a load of laundry, cleaned up my young son's smelly butt, and stepped on Lego blocks and matched and mated all his socks. And I did it all just like a man. He likes noodles. I made him some noodles, like my mom's used to do. But I cooked his up like a man. He cut his finger, bled a bit. My stomach flipped, but I didn't show it. Just cleaned him up, put on a Band-Aid, gave him some Go-Gurt, sent him back to play. And I smiled after I did it. I don't really know why, but sometimes just watch it, and I forget to remember to watch him like a man. And then I can only see how much I love this human being, how much love he'll need from me, his dad, tasked with teaching him how, or learning myself, to be a man. That's what Daddy Do. That's from Songs for the Cleveland Avenue Warriors, and one of my favorites. Like I said, it turned into so much more.
Is there another one you'd like to share with the audience, Gary?
Yes, yes. This is excuse me. I just had it pulled up. This is, again, like I said, a lot of my poetry is autobiographical. For me, this particular poem, it kind of gives you some insight into my thoughts and my feelings as a 14-year-old kid looking out on the. So the title of this poem is Obama. And before we get into this, I want to say this, that this particular poem was, when I wrote this, I dedicated this poem to, it was, I mentioned him, he's a character in the poem, but he's not mentioned by name. But I want to mention his name right now. His name was Ellsworth Dansby, and he was one of the Tuskegee Airmen. And so he had a big influence on me when I was a kid. This poem is dedicated to him, to Ellsworth Dansby. The title of the poem, however, is Obama. That shit was inspirational. Like a 14-year-old kid seeing a partially dismantled airplane in a black man's garage. We didn't all stomp roaches in the morning on the way to a cereal box cinched up tight to keep out the critters. No. Factory heat baked in the grease that pieces of beat up steel-toed boots and khakis or brooms left calluses as big as dimes on the leathery hands of those who drove the big Buicks on my block, and still they struggled to keep up appearances. Show up on Sunday and strut in Stetsons and Stacey Adams after sipping shine on I'm sorry, I'm going to have to restart that. I think my phone was about to log you out, so I'm going to. Okay. Obama. That shit was inspirational. Like a 14-year-old kid seeing a partially meant. That shit was inspirational. Like a 14-year-old kid seeing a partially dismantled airplane in a black man's garage. We didn't all stomp roaches in the morning on the way to a cereal box cinched up tight to keep out the critters. No. Factory heat baked in the grease that settled into the creases of beat-up steel-toed boots and khakis, or brooms left calluses as big as dimes on the leathery hands of those who drove the big Buicks on my block. And still they struggled to keep up appearances. Show up on Stetsons and Stacey Adams after sipping shine on Saturday night at the after-hour spot. That's it. That's what was done when there were a few dimes left after making the car payment. The pimps and the dope boys would sometimes come through in souped up sedans on rims, but that would be all that. So imagine the surprise at the sight of a honey brown skinned man with light dancing in his eyes as he took the time to describe the foils and flaps and wind resistance and what it meant to fly with the 477th Bombardment Group and to train with the big B-52s. It sparked wonder. Made a little black boy look about in wide-eyed delight and wonder at the possibilities suddenly revealed, as if the invitation to come by and cut grass for the brokest member of the high school orchestra, but that he saw me, one of 3 or 4 black kids on strings. It meant the world and opened up a part of the world that had been denied to me in AP history. I didn't know. I didn't know that there was more out there. That black folk moved and made waves and changed and demanded that they be treated the same. The high school counselor told me to give up, to let go and to accept the inevitability of dope deals or molten steel before the collapse of an iron economy, overwhelmed by the Chinese. I denied her the pleasure and went to state. I did give up, though. Eventually agreed with her and left in disgrace. At least it was for me. Most didn't even notice. Just accepted my presence back on the block, even though I no longer cared. I'd attached the straps to so that I could carry it on my back and still throw hands when it was time to defend our Section 8 housing units. They didn't care and didn't want to hear my fanciful tales of black men building airplanes on the west side, way out past the university, where the rich white folks reside. Yeah, right. That don't seem right. Did he sell dope or sell out? Because that's how we can expect to get out, unless we can run real fast. And black boys learn real fast that there's a limit to how far the feet can take you, like ducking through backyards and hopping fences at 3 a.m. pursuit. So even fast niggas end up back on the block after their careers or prison terms run out. But the possibility of some dude who looks like me, who donated my instrument and made sure that someone like me would actually play it, made me believe in something that I could not see. I remember interrupting him at some point and asking, my imagination activated, "What's a Tuskegee?" And that's Obama.
Gary, the last question we always ask our guests on this podcast is, what are 2 books that have been important to you as a person and why?
Okay. All right. The first book. I was a huge Stephen King fan growing up, and I think there was a time there during my teenage years that I probably read everything that he published. The book that really, really, really stuck with me, that really changed my outlook, and it really does influence the way I write and the way I see storytelling now, was his book, The Stand. And I just remember that man, I was just reading that book when I was a kid. It kept me awake at night, and even after reading it, I remember just really thinking about the themes and just how that it affected me. So it stuck with me for a really long time, and I fell off. I remember going to college, and I didn't read anything outside of the textbook for years. And one of the books that brought me back was by an author named Walter Mosley, and the book was A Devil in a Blue Dress. And it's something that my mother had laying around the house, and I'm just picking it up on a whim and reading it probably in an afternoon. And it's a detective or noir series that it blew me away in my early 20s, and so it reignited a love of reading for me when I was in my early 20s.
Gary, where can the people find you on the internet?
I have a website, whatdaddydo.com, and you can also find me on Instagram, or you can find my poetry, or GE Moore 71 on his Instagram also.
Gary Moore, thanks so much for coming on the podcast.
Oh man, thank you. Thanks for having me.
Help George stay on the Chicago Heights City Council. Go and donate today at tinyurl.com/AldermanGeorge 2023.
Begin to transform your life and work towards inner peace with expert psychotherapy. At True Heights Treatment, our experienced therapists provide personalized, compassionate care to help you overcome life's challenges and reach your goals. Whether you're struggling with depression, anxiety, relationship issues, or other mental health concerns, our team is here to support you. With a warm and welcoming in-person and virtual office atmosphere and a commitment to person-centered and evidence-based treatments, we are dedicated to helping you address your life's challenges. Contact us now to schedule your first session at 708-248-7039 or online at trueheightstx.com. Book your appointment today and start your journey towards a happier, healthier life.
Need more George? Like his pages on Facebook. Friends of George Brassey PAC, Fifth Ward Business Alliance, Chicago Heights Bicycle and Pedestrian Resource Center, and the George Brassey Podcast.